Hello, this presentation looks at Chapter 9 of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I'm using the Signet Classics version of the novel if you're looking for the same page references, but obviously the text will be the same whichever version you're using. So in this chapter, the narration has switched entirely to Dr. Lanyon's voice. This is what Mr. Utterson is reading. It details Lanyon getting the letter from Jekyll, Jekyll asking him to go to his house, break into a specific cabinet, take a drawer, remove that drawer, go home with it, and wait in for a man who will be arriving at midnight. Lanyon is slightly perturbed by the letter and what is in the drawer, but at midnight a man who turns out to be Hyde arrives. Lanyon obviously reacts in the same way that everybody does to Hyde, but gives him the stuff from the drawer, which Hyde then mixes up. He asks Lanyon whether he wants to see what's going to happen next, and Lanyon agrees. So he takes the concoction and transforms before Lanyon's eyes into Jekyll. Lanyon is so incredibly shocked by this that he knows he is going to die because of it. So let's think about the fact that this has structurally changed. We have had the switch from Utterson's voice to Lanyon's, and at the end of this video I want to discuss a little bit more about why Stevenson might have made that change. If we look further down on page 101, we have the "we may have differed at times on scientific questions." So emphasising again that Lanyon is more traditional and Jekyll has been far more progressive and innovative in his beliefs about science. And although this has drawn a wedge between them, Jekyll still believes they have an emotional connection to each other and are good friends. Jekyll uses a listing when he says Lanyon, my life, my honour, my reason. So here Stevenson is using asymplectic listing, which might be something that you want to include as your AO2. Remembering asymplectic meaning that it is not, the list is not broken up by conjunctives like and or but. It's using commas instead. And this gives a sense of the sort of weight and emotional impact behind what Jekyll is writing to Lanyon. If we then turn over to page 102 and we carry on down towards the end, I think there's an interesting contextual point here in that the Jekyll writing the letter wants to wait until all the servants have gone to bed. And again, it's that idea of not necessarily doing the right thing, but being perceived as doing the right thing in Victorian novel, in Victorian society. In this novel, we see Stevenson positioning men as being completely sort of obsessed with what their reputation is viewed as. And it reflects 19th century society at the time, the idea that being seen as doing something dishonourable in front of your servants could be very risky, and that the news could get out, and also that you would be their moral gatekeeper and should not be setting them a bad example. If we can carry on over to page 103, we have the hubris of Dr. Jekyll being made very apparent to us again. Stevenson uses the shipwreck of my reason, suggesting that Jekyll has always felt that he is in control, even when now it's blindingly obvious that events are running away from him. He does not have the capacity to control what is happening. But even then, he feels that this idea that if this goes wrong, it will be Lanyon's fault for not helping him, rather than his own fault for becoming involved in the situation. We get to the end of the letter, and then there's the PS. Fresh terror has struck upon his soul. So I think this shows a really good juxtaposition between this idea of him thinking that Lanyon can solve everything and save him, and then him realising the severity actually of the situation that he has created. At the end of the PS, if we look down towards the bottom of page 103, we have Lanyon's reaction, where Stevenson's right, I made sure my colleague was insane. So here I think it's interesting in viewing it is Jekyll actually insane in what he undertakes, or is trying to go against the natural order of things so full of arrogance that actually it provokes insanity? And I think here Stevenson is saying something quite interesting about scientific progress without being tempered with reason and humility. If we turn over to page 104, I'm very interested in the sentence, the door was very strong, the lock excellent. And again, we can remember, of course, that it is a literal door locked up, but also we see the symbolism of what is being hidden, and that Jekyll has taken great pains to hide what he is up to behind a metaphorical door. We have all these doorways, the secrets as motifs reoccurring throughout the novel. If we continue down page 104, I think it's really interesting that the word double appears quite a lot in Jekyll's notes, in that it's not just the idea of him being able to be two people, being both Jekyll and being Hyde, but that Stevenson's used this word here, double, suggesting a duplicity to Jekyll, that he can't be trusted, that he has two sides, and he is only showing one to people around him. So therefore, there is something deceitful and untrustworthy about him. If we turn to page 105, this is obviously the appearance of Hyde. At this point, Lanyon doesn't know it's Hyde, but he's described as a small man. We get the moment where we see the policeman, and the small man is startled and he wants to sort of get in the house away from the policeman. This is reminding us of the dangerous nature of Hyde, who is obviously on the run from the police after the death of Sir Danvers Carew. We've got further AO2 that is quite useful here, describing him as small, again thinking about that idea of 19th century fear of progress stopping and people reverting to some sort of mean, uncivilized type of sort of troglodyte. We've got the shocking expression of his face. Interestingly, he's got great muscular activity, but also this sort of debility of constitution. So in spite of being physically strong enough to beat a man to death, he also seems sort of juxtaposing that Stevenson's juxtaposing this with the idea that he's also somehow sickly, linking to that idea of moral sickness. We've got this idea that when Lanyon sees Hyde, he physically reacts to him. There is a sinking of the pulse. His revulsion to Hyde makes him feel like he's physically reacting. And if we look on the top of page 106, to turn to some nobler hinge than the principle of hatred. So he sees it as more than just disliking Hyde, that his physical reaction is a repulsion from Hyde because of his moral decay and the depravity that seems to be suggested by his personality. The disgustful curiosity is another great bit of AO2 if you're thinking about how Stevenson is using language to describe Hyde. Obviously, we get the idea here that Hyde is wearing Jekyll's clothes, that is why they don't fit him. And we've got some beautiful piece of triadic structure in that he's seizing, surprising, and revolting. And again, it's almost like by using this, Stevenson is suggesting there's wave upon wave of disgust about Hyde. If we turn over to page 107, we've got his teeth great, his face ghastly. We've got, again, these animalistic tendencies that Hyde has, suggesting he's not fully civilized, not properly human, and that is a reason why people might fear him. Turning over to page 108, I think it's very interesting, this moment where Hyde is asking Lanyon whether he wants to see what's going to happen. Stevenson's almost presenting this as like the Faust myth that by gaining this knowledge is like making a pact with the devil. And he even mentions the unbelief of Satan. And obviously, there's the foreshadowing that in the origin of the Faust myth, where Faust swaps knowledge by making, wants to have great knowledge by making a deal with God, he actually ends up being cursed and sent to hell as a consequence. And this obviously foreshadows that Lanyon is not going to come out well of gaining this new knowledge. And I think here as well, the next set of highlights, you have been so long bound to the most narrow and material views, denied the virtue of transcendental medicine, you have derided your superiors, behold. And again, Stevenson is showing the tension between scientific progress and rationality, and where the line should be drawn. There's a description of Hyde changing into Jekyll. I think there's an interesting use of the word black at the top of page 109, with the associations of sort of the moral blackness in the word. That Lanyon instinctively, although a man of science, screams for God when he is in terror of what he's seen. And so again, we have this conflict between religion and science. And he says, I saw what I saw, I heard what I heard, and my soul sickened at it. And if we're thinking about how disgusted he was by this moral turpitude that he's seen, it's interesting that Stevenson now uses Lanyon, not Utterson, as the narrator. So although there's lots of description of emotion and reaction, Lanyon, more than Utterson would probably give, Lanyon still can't face up to or articulate the full story, so showing that language is failing, and it takes our next chapter with Jekyll to show what really, truly is happening, because Lanyon again cannot look into that abyss. Thank you.